people who are just joining, we're going to give everyone a little bit of time to get connected. So we'll be starting in just a minute or so.
There we go. Okay, it looks like you are all set to go, Joanne.
All right, well, welcome everyone tonight. Thank you so much for joining us as we talk about some of the solutions for some of the issues that we've been talking about our unhoused neighbors. And I just want to thank everyone for attending these sessions. I hope they've been informative and that we will get a chance now to look at what we can do. What are some of the options we have to really bring people from living on the streets into a housing situation with the kinds of supports they need to get through, to get back on their feet. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to start with, please, with Brittany Turner-Jackson, if you would be the first.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Brittany Turner-Jackson, and I'm the Director of Permanent Housing Programs with In Street Village. I've been there about 8 years now, and I've been in my current role for about 2.5 years. So really have had the opportunity to learn an abundance about supportive housing and what it takes to make a successful program. Still a lot more learning to go, so I'm very happy to be here tonight and being a part of this discussion.
Thank you so much. Jean-Michel Girard, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm Jean-Michel Giraud, the President and CEO of Friendship Place. Friendship Place is a homeless services organization serving the DC metropolitan area and with a national reach through best practices.
Thank you. Charlene Castle, would you please go next?
Hi, everybody. My name is Charlene Castle. I'm the Director of Operations with JDOT, which is a small local business that focuses on developing and operating permanent supportive housing in the district. In particular, we focus on single site permanent supportive housing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I work with Brittany closely on a project. I just realized this is the first time I've seen the bottom half of your face because we've only worked together since COVID. So that was exciting, but happy to be here with everyone.
Christopher, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure, I am. Thank you. I'm Chris Rutledge, Chief Development Officer at Friendship Place, and very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've left Alan Banks for last. Alan, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe even a little bit about your story?
Thank you, Joanne. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Banks, currently Community Engagement Associate at Friendship Place. I have been a speaker advocate for homelessness since 2008. I have 6 years lived experience, very long story, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing today.
Well, that's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about, have you ever lived in any supportive housing, Alan?
Yes, I have. I'll start with a little bit about where I was. I had a very, a person in America who thought they were safe from homelessness, very good job, material stability. And I was living with mental illness the whole time, specifically major depression. And those things, that along with being a severe introvert, finally took over my life and took everything away from me, my marriage, my home, all those material things that I had in relation with my 2 children. So I experienced homelessness for 6 years. And It was quite a storm. I'll never forget the first day. I was in total shock. Didn't have the slightest idea what was going to happen 1 minute from now. I experienced the best and worst on the streets. I was homeless for 6 years, 3 years on the streets of DC and 3 years in the shelter system of DC. I have slept with rats. I have eaten out of the trash. I have experienced the worst in people. I said good morning to a lady one day at a bus stop, and she turned and she saw someone experience homelessness and she turned her back. But I've also experienced the best in people. One winter morning, so cold, freezing really bad. This old lady came out of nowhere, asking my name, something that hadn't happened in years, and gave me $2 for a cup of coffee. She said a prayer for me, and gave me $2 for a cup of coffee. So I've seen the best and the worst in people. I've been so cold that I burst out crying. For those of you from this area, mark the difference from the distance from Silver Spring subway station to the National Mall. In the wintertime, I would walk that many times at night so I didn't fall asleep at night and freeze, because it does get that cold in DC sometimes. So, you add those miles, and I walked it a bunch of times. Didn't have money for the bus anyway. So that's a lot of the rough part, the bad part, or some of it really. You have no idea. But see, that was a long time ago. And I'm not here tonight to talk about me so much. The story goes from me to we, and that's what my story is now. So the topic tonight is permanent supportive housing. And I can speak through life experience on the importance of that. I started my mental recovery years ago, and I wasn't able to put the tools I was learning into practice because I was going back into shelter survival mode. And you just cannot practice what you need to do to move forward when you have to survive in a shelter. I am ashamed to this day to tell people that I had to get into an almost physical altercation with someone in the shelter over a water bottle. And if you look at that from the outside and but this is the situation of it. Everyone knew whose water bottle it was. And if I had just let this person take it, that means everybody can take my stuff. And that's the reality. That's one of the reality of shelter life. So when you're doing that, it's hard to manage your brain correctly. Struggle for years, looking for housing. One day, I was put in touch with an organization called Friendship Place. Friendship Place got my name on a Monday. And by that Friday, I was in an apartment. I always say I don't know how they did it. I don't care how they did it. Just know that they did it. But that was just the first step. Permanent supportive housing, the roof is the first step. I was in such a mental state at the time when I went into housing that I may have gone in and closed the door and not come back out. I was really in a bad state mentally. I had already been suicidal once. So permanent supportive roof was step one. But the most important part of that is the case management that comes along with it. And I always sing the praises of our case managers. My first case manager here, and I'm going to say her name. Her name was Giddy Paul. And she told me right in the beginning that she wanted me to talk to her like I was talking to my daughter. I do not know what switch that flipped in my head, but that allowed me to open up to her. And that allowed me to address things that I had been carrying for years. That's all part of permanent supportive housing. mentorship. I was connected with a mentor. My mentor served as a connection off-duty hours. Yes, our case managers do a tremendous job. They are miracle workers. But we demand that our case managers also take care of themselves. So at 5 o'clock, their day has to start ending so they can live their lives. Well, a mentor is that person who can pick up that, that after hours time, the weekend time, things like that, because you have to learn or relearn how to live a normal life, for lack of better words to me, budget your money, grocery shop, do laundry even, things that we take for granted today. You forget how to do that when you experience homelessness because you don't have to do your laundry because you only have one set of clothes that people rocking like me. All the time, I wonder where I would be if not for Friendship Place and not for our program of permanent supportive housing. I never understood how you could go somewhere and say we, an hour, when you weren't there in the beginning. You just kind of like grabbing on. Well, this organization taught me how you say we, an hour.
That's just wonderful.
And I'm gonna stop there. And if anybody has any questions about it, I'm open to any questions once we get to that part. So I'm done. Thank you very much, Joanne.
Oh, what a wonderful, thank you so much for sharing, and what a really wonderful part. Let's talk a little bit about some of the varieties of ways that we approach supportive housing. What kinds? What does it look like at different organizations? Maybe Charlene, you could talk a little bit about what it looks like at your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Alan. So much of what you said just now touches on what I've seen in my work and what I love most about this work. So thank you for sharing all of that. So like I said, the type of housing that JDOT works on is single site permanent supportive housing. So what that means is apartment buildings where all or a majority of the units are for folks who have experienced homelessness. So there are 3 sites in DC that I either work in actively or helped get developed and leased up where everybody moves in. And those are the Help Walter Reed site on the Walter Reed campus as part of the redevelopment. That was one of the first buildings to open, and that's 77 units for veterans who have experienced homelessness. The John and Jill Kerr Conway residence, which is on North Capitol Street, right next to the NPR headquarters. It kind of looks like stacked blocks. And that has 124 units, about half of which are mostly for veterans who have experienced homelessness, and then a few for the Department of Behavioral Health clients as well. And then Diane's house, which is where I work with Brittany, which is 42 units for women who have experienced homelessness. And with all of these sites, there are kind of 3 essential components that are at the site. There's property management, like you would have, in any apartment building, there to address maintenance requests, sign the lease, do all of that type of stuff. And then importantly, as Alan said, we have on-site case management. So Brittany is the supervisor at the N Street Village Diane's house site. At the other site, we have 2 VA social workers, and then at the Walter Reed site, Community Connections provides the case management services. And then often there's a kind of a third partner that does residential services. Sometimes that's the nonprofit partner who's there to really cultivate that mentorship piece that Alan touched on, of helping to cultivate that community. At the John and Jill Kerr Conway residence, the nonprofit partner is Community Solutions, which is who I've worked most directly with, and we help create a peer leader program so that there are folks to help really foster the community in the building. And I think, so again, this is just one type of permanent supportive housing. There's also scattered site, which I'll leave it to someone else to talk a little bit more about. But I think what I have found so valuable in working in single site permanent supportive housing is both that I think it's often a very good solution for the folks who are the most vulnerable, who have experienced homelessness for the longest amount of time, who really benefit from having a case manager there, right, during the day that can just kind of like be there to check in with them, right, and really get that extra support. And that one of the things that I didn't really expect coming into this work, but that I've seen develop at all of the buildings is just the sense of community. It's like at the John and Jill Kirk Conway residence, for example, several of the veterans who moved in there knew each other from before, right? They had been in the shelters together. And so to be able to move together with their community to this building was really important and impactful for them. And some of them had actually denied prior placements because they wanted to be able to move with their community, right? And I think that that's a real asset of this particular type of housing.
Thank you. Mr. Turner Jackson, you want to talk a little bit about the kind of permanent support or the supportive housing, I guess, that N Street offers? I know they do a lot of great work.
Yes, thank you. So at N Street Village, of course, we offer a range of housing interventions from low barrier shelter to temporary housing to our permanent supportive housing programs. And currently we have 6 permanent supportive housing programs that we are involved with in different ways. We have our Miriam's House and then our Legacy flagship permanent supportive housing program that we actually own and provide the supportive services in. And then we partner with William C. Smith there to provide the property management services there. And then there's 4 programs, our Earner's House program, Diane's House that I work with Charlene on, Capitol Vista, and then Phyllis Wheatley, where in Street Village, our role is to provide the case management or the supportive services to the residents in these various programs. All of our programs too are single site or site-based, which has been absolutely beneficial. It just provides ease of access and efficient services to the women that are residing in our programs. We serve women and transgender individuals. The majority of our programs are housing first programs, meaning that there are no barriers to entry. We really stress the importance of the fact that people get housed quickly and that there are no conditions to be housed with us, like seeking mental health treatment or seeking substance abuse treatment. We really open the door for you to come as you are. And then once you're in and you're settled, then we really get to work with the case management services and building those relationships to help people maintain a sense of stability. One thing that is wonderful about In Street Village is that on top of our housing services, we also have other services such as our wellness center. Pre-COVID, we had a drop-in center, and then our Marge and Mac vocational center. Our wellness center provides an array of wellness services. Pre-COVID, we had a doctor coming on site, a dentist coming on site, and then offered a variety of wellness-centered classes. In addition to that, our residents are able to receive support with any employment goals that they have, and any support that they need as far as obtaining benefits. So I think with our supportive housing and then also having these services to add to that, it really creates an atmosphere of just holistic care. So that's really essential when it comes to providing the women who are exiting homelessness.
I love that holistic care. I love that. And then also what you were talking about with housing first and how important it is to actually have a place in order for you to recover from whatever brought you into homelessness. Jean-Michel, would you like to talk a little bit about the variety of what Friendship Place offers? I know also there's a question here, which I know you guys also have transitional housing. And the question is there a role for transitional housing assisting those who are homeless? I know you guys provide such a wide variety, so I thought maybe you could talk about that as well.
Yes, thank you. Well, Friendship Place is turning 30 this year. We were founded in Upper Northwest, and we functioned at the neighborhood level for a long time. And what brought us out of the neighborhood in Ward 3, it was actually Housing First, when the Fenty administration was looking for partners to do work in supportive, permanent supportive housing. So about what we do, a lot of street work in Upper Northwest and Georgetown for everybody, street work for youth in all 8 wards. So we're active in DuPont Circle and in the neighborhoods around you. And then a case management program for youth based in Upper Northwest, a drop-in, a clinic with medical and psychiatric consultations, a job placement program. We're really proud of this model we have developed. It's called Job First, and it allows us to expedite the soft skills training, build people up in terms of their self-confidence, and manage hires in 90 days on average. And we're hoping that the city is going to take notice and bring this model to scale. We think that during COVID and post-COVID, there's going to be just a growing need for job placement. And at this stage, we do a lot of vocational training instead of job placement at the city level. The transitional programs you're talking about are 2 24-hour access shelters that are in at National Methodist Church, one for men, one for women. They're rather small, one has 7 beds, one has 3. There is a strong emphasis on employment in these sites. They are not what you would traditionally consider transitional housing, which can go up to 2 years. We had a shelter where women could stay 2 years before, and the church decided not to keep the program. There are issues, there are questions on transitional housing, because it is felt that sometimes there's an incentive to really not move on as soon as you could. At least it's the way we've read it through the years. So the programs are good, I think, when the need level is there. And some of the families we serve at the Brooks, our short-term housing facility in Upper Northwest, do go to transitional housing for additional support. They basically need to get to gain more parenting skills. So I think it has its place, but sometimes it has encouraged people to stay in the programs a bit too long, and where the exits could have been faster. The other large program we have is a rapid rehousing program for veterans that serves DC and the 8 counties around us. And VA is the funder. And then, of course, permanent supportive housing. We joined, as I mentioned, in 2008. We were among the first providers to implement the Housing First model at the city level. The model had come from New York. Pathways DC was using it. Pathways New York was the founder. We decided that this was a great model in that it really removed the moral judgment on housing that we had in the abstinence model. The abstinence model required somebody to be sober or not have used drugs for the last 6 months. That was the standard question when people were being screened. So, people were being honest, and we were barring them from entering the system. It just didn't feel right. We didn't know what was going to happen to them in the heat, in the cold. And Housing First, I think, was a revolution in DC, and it's been spreading throughout the country. I think it's the logical choice when you open a program these days for permanent supportive housing in homeless services. And so we're a blend of, the approaches you've heard about. We do have a large number of families in their own apartments throughout the city, and a lot of them are east of the park and east of the river, and in the southwest. We are their service provider. So basically we provide them with case management and help them manage their lives. And they have a voucher, usually from the federal government, at the great majority. The families pay 30% of their income towards the cost of the rent, and the voucher covers the rest. We have over 240 singles living in their own apartments throughout the city in buildings again with everybody else. We actually like the scattered site model, and when we joined the Housing First movement in the city, we thought this would be a great choice in that it was putting people in buildings with other people, and we thought that was a great thing. And we did bid 5 years ago on La Casa and got to run La Casa. So La Casa is in Columbia Heights on Irving Street at Irving and 14th. It's a beautiful building the city built. It's a green building. We welcome there 40 men. And these are the men who are the most vulnerable men in the system at any one point. So as soon as an apartment frees up, we bring somebody in. And one of the reasons, and you know, Charlene mentioned community, one of the reasons we wanted to run La Casa, even though we had never run a building at that scale, was that sense of community that you can build. And we felt that we could be really good at it. And it certainly has materialized that way. The staff are friendly, well-trained, very effective in their approach, and really engage the participants. And it's a pleasure to visit there whenever you go. So that's our experience with permanent supportive housing.
Thank you so much, everyone. This is great. There's the variety of ways that we can help people and the ways that you guys have talked about, the different options. It's just great. I think one of the next things I'd like to talk about a little bit is what does it take to create this supportive housing? You know, what do we need from the city, from your organization? What kinds of things do you have to think about in order to build that? And I'm not sure who wants to go first. Brittany, you want to go first this time? This is how to create more. How do you create new supportive housing? What does it mean? What do you have to do?
Well, first and foremost, I think we definitely need the financial resources in the city to expand our permanent supportive housing programs. I'm not too well versed in all the intricacies when it comes to financing the programs, but I know that as a city, we definitely need to look into more ways to fund these opportunities. And I know that PSH, through the research, it's been shown to cut back in costs that that people who are homeless use frequently, such as like the emergency rooms and hospitals, and then also usage in the criminal justice system. So I know that there's a lot of discussion out there is since money is being cut back in those areas, in those systems, how do we reinvest those funds to go towards expanding more permanent supportive housing programs?
Charlene, you want to talk a little bit about what it takes to do a new building for the single site?
Yeah, absolutely. So for single site buildings in DC, there's really like 3 funding streams that are necessary. There's the capital, you know, to actually like build the building or rehab the building, the services to fund like the service providers like N Street and Friendship Place, and then the operating, which is the rent, that subsidy piece that comes from the DC Housing Authority. As far as the capital funding, for most buildings in DC, they're funded through the consolidated request for proposals that the Department of Housing and Community Development puts out every year. So different developers, some for-profit, some nonprofit, some DC-based, some not, all put in bids. And they say, you know, sometimes they're building buildings like the ones that I work in, where they're majority permanent supportive housing. Sometimes they're building like 100-unit building and including 8 units of permanent supportive housing. They changed the requirements recently so that they are required to include at least 5% permanent supportive housing in any development that's being funded through that consolidated RFP. So I think that, having requirements like that helps. To Brittany's point, the big thing is money, right? Like they only have so much money to do that. The Way Home campaign is a great resource for this. They put out regularly like their updated budget asks of here's what it would cost to fund the entire need for permanent supportive housing in DC. I don't want to quote the number because I don't remember it off the top of my head and I don't want to get it wrong, but I definitely recommend like looking into them and signing up for their email updates. But it's not a small number, and to Brittany's point, it is still significantly cheaper than what it costs to keep people in shelters and on the street.
If I may, I have the numbers on the initial Housing First program. It started in New York, and they tracked the survival cost of 100 people experiencing homelessness for a year, including what Brittany stated, some of those things and a few more. The cost was $10 million for that year. They placed those 100 people in stable housing the next year with case management, which is most important, and the cost went down to $2 million. Housing First is a worldwide program that's named different things. I'll just Neighbors First, but it costs less to have people in stable housing than to have people homeless on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And we need more money.
Jean-Michel or Chris, do either one of you want to talk a little bit about sort of what it takes, you more scattered site, or if you want to talk about what it takes to add more permanent supportive housing for Friendship Place?
Well, for us, it's been an ongoing growth. We started with an initial caseload of 35 people. So that gives you an idea. And then 2 weeks into the process, the city called and we nearly doubled that. And then there's been steady growth since then. This year, we're adding, with the support from DHS, of course, a caseload of 12 families and 17 singles. So and I think the city really has demonstrated that it is very much interested in building up organizations like Friendship Place and the other providers so that we can continue to provide these services. We are not builders, we're service providers. It's sort of our identity. So we have not yet worked with a developer, for instance, to create a building. We run, as I mentioned, 2 buildings the city built and then selected us to run them. There is good news about the funding, and that is that as of April of 2022, the case management dollars, so what organizations like Friendship Place receive to do the work, should be coming from Medicaid. So that's going to take some pressure off the system in DC, because these federal funds will finally come into the district. They probably should have come out sooner, but it's in the making. And so I think that's going to create change. For affordable housing, what we really are looking at, I always say it when I speak on that, is affordable housing is for people who make salaries like a police officer, a fireman, a teacher. The folks we serve need deeply affordable housing. Their level of income is really low. And one of the reasons I mentioned that is not everybody qualifies for permanent supportive housing in the city. We use an index to evaluate people's needs. It's on 20 points. The higher end of the range is for permanent supportive housing. The middle range is for rapid rehousing, so services over 6 to 8 months, roughly maybe. And then if the person or the family is very self-sufficient and just need help with housing, that's all they get. So we've gotten better at measuring people's needs, and I think that's really important, because you want to build a good system, and at the same time, you don't want to get criticized for spending taxpayers' money in a way that doesn't work. But in order to get a higher rating, typically there's a combination of mental health and/or, I always say and/or because everybody is absolutely different, obviously, but mental health and/or addiction, renal disease, HIV/AIDS, and so on. Meaning that some people are just not going to qualify for it because it is deemed that they could really rebuild with a job. But these folks, when they get the jobs, need very, very affordable housing.
There's a question in the chat. How many more permanent supportive housing units do you think we need as a city? And is it doable to have sufficient permanent supportive housing, or is that a pipe dream? And I'm going to use the numbers from the Way Home campaign, which Charlene mentioned. They're calling on the mayor to invest a little over $96 million to end chronic homelessness for 2,761 individuals and 432 families. These are based on the numbers are based on what they get on the yearly point in time homelessness count. So there are somebody, across the city, there's one night a year where people go and they count exactly who's out there. There's a difference between some people who simply need housing because they are, they need more affordable housing versus people who are chronically homeless who need more of the permanent supportive housing. If anyone wants to add to what I just answered, feel free. I think it's doable. I mean, do you guys think it's doable?
I think it's doable. The National Alliance to End Homelessness publishes figures and says that if our budget priorities at the federal level were the right ones, in other words, to house everybody in the country, it would be pretty affordable to get to that. But we have to think of our priorities, I think, and of what is stopping us from going where we need to go with this. It's, a combination of beliefs that people need to fend for themselves. And it's just, there's an aggregate of things that go along in that direction. But we have had a situation in the country in the 1970s when we actually had a surplus of housing units, and then the 80s rolled around, and of course the cuts under President Reagan made it so that at the end of the 80s we were in a deficit. We didn't have enough units. So I think sometimes it's helpful to look at our history and to see when we were doing better and how we did that. But I absolutely think that we can end homelessness. We just have to make it a priority.
And if I think that advocacy and people raising their voice and asking for that of their government is very much where we need to go to really hear that voice. We actually have just started the Friendship Action Network, which is designed to give people tools to advocate for things such as this. I'll drop a link in the chat to everybody. Yeah, and so if you want to sign up to get action alerts, this will be a good way to sign up, learn how to reach out to the city officials and really, have your voice heard to make this all possible.
John Hassel asked that 96 million would only be about $34,000 a person experiencing homelessness, right? And I'm gonna have to trust your math on that, John. I don't have my computer or my calculator handy. That sounds about right. So, I mean, when you think about the cost that, of somebody who's homeless, who ends up in an ER and ends up in being arrested, ends up causing, the cleanup and things like that have to go on, and just above and beyond just the human toll of a human being having to sleep on a sidewalk and with nowhere to go to the bathroom, nowhere to take a shower, nowhere to wash their clothes, nowhere to keep their stuff. So that cost it does end up being per year. It's not a one-time investment. I think for permanent supportive housing, the question is that per year or is it most of it one-time investment? I should let you guys talk more than me, sorry. It is per year, right? It would be about, how much would you say a person in one of your units ends up costing about a year? And anyone can answer that.
That's above my pay grade.
34, okay.
No, I wouldn't even, that's a unique question. I've never heard that question before, and I would not know myself.
I would need a calculator for sure. I can say that, the rent on most of the units that I'm working on, if the person has no income and the DC Housing Authority is paying all of their rent, it's anywhere between like $1,300 and $1,600 a month. So that would be like the monthly cost just for that operating piece that I mentioned. And then of course there's the cost to actually develop it. And then there's the cost to pay the case managers who are providing those services, as well as all of the nonprofits overhead. I will defer to Jesse. I think someone said that Jesse next week is going to be from the Way Home campaign is going to be presenting. So I'm sure that he can speak to those numbers a little bit better. I also see Kate Coventry commenting in the chat, who is the number wizard, as I'm sure everyone here knows. So she maybe has, like DCFPI might have some numbers on that too, but those are the ones that I can speak to.
Yes, Kate had written, so Kate's with the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, who does calculate numbers. That's what she does for a living. And she said it's 29, a little over 29,000 per year for singles, which includes rental vouchers and services. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions, but while I'm doing that, if there's any other comments that any of the panelists would like to say, something that you've thought about that you haven't covered so far.
Well, you know, there's a lot of talk about permanent supportive housing and why we need shelters. And it's really important to think about that. Shelters are part of the crisis response system. If somebody becomes homeless today, they need a place to sleep tonight. And so you have to talk about that, in that some people would have us just move into permanent supportive housing across everything, but it just doesn't work, because some people, you know, do experience crisis and sudden homelessness. With that said, obviously our short-term housing facilities, as we now call them for families, are top-notch. And you know, the Brooks, and I invite you all to come post-COVID. We're going to open the doors. The Brooks is a beautiful place. It's service enriched. The staff are well-trained, friendly, and you know, the outcomes are really great. But on the single side, we can do better, and we need more service-enriched shelters. The city is building a new site on the grounds of St. Elizabeth, and renovating one of the shelters currently, moving on to another one soon. But we need to keep an eye on our singles shelters. You can tell from some of what Alan shared that these are not environments that are conducive to rebuilding a lot of the times, right? And so, you know, and with all due respect to the providers, because what they have to do, given the sites they operate in, is just a challenge. I know that. We need to look at that. I think we need to look, we were, you know, talking about the singles and what needs to happen. We do need more job placement for singles. We need to do better. And at Friendship Place, now that we have this full-time advocacy and community organizer on the staff, we're going to look at that. It's part of our new strategic goal for advocacy, that we're going to advocate for better services for singles.
This question is actually relevant, I think, probably to many of the places that you guys have built and moved people into, but could you talk a little bit about the resistance of neighbors to having permanent supportive housing located near them, both good and bad experiences? I know the Brooks had a lot. Go ahead, Alan.
Thank you very much. 30 years ago, when a group of people in Northwest Washington wanted to put an emergency shelter in a rec center, ages-old hate popped up. And some people in the community started screaming, there are no homeless people here. If you build a shelter, homeless people will come here. 29 years later, in a few days later, when we're ready to open the Brooks, that same exact ages-old hate reared its head, only stronger this time. It was more vocal, more vulgar, it was louder. You know, I went to a community meeting, and I knew I shouldn't have, because I know me. And one gentleman got in line and took his turn at the mic, and he said that, yes, we want to help these people, but why here? I let that one go. And then he followed it up with, why do we want to have these people schlepped out of their environments? I had to leave the building. But that's part of the ages-old hate that's still there. But luckily, ages-old good won out. And there are so many people who want to help. Yeah, the ones who were hating, they were making a lot of noise and they were loud, but they eventually had to shut up because right is right and wrong is wrong, and I'll stop.
Anyone else want to talk about experiences that they've had with this?
I can speak to a little bit about it on some of the single site projects. I've been fortunate that I personally have not come across this just yet. The John and Jill Kerr Conway residence was kind of a unique example in the opposite direction of the area of Noma that now, you know, if anyone's been to Noma, like it's all apartment buildings and mostly luxury and office buildings. We were there first. And the district gave us the land. And so we kind of situated there and everything else has come up around it. And people were really excited, like the folks in the district were excited about that building being there. And it's a beautiful building if you've seen it. And I think that was a big part of that too. I think some of the ways that we try to mitigate this when we're developing new projects is knowing who your allies are. Right, like the Washington Interfaith Network has done a lot of great organizing around this, and knowing, you know, which council members and other folks in the district are gonna can help push things through, and trying to meet the other folks where they are, right, and acknowledge that like there's going to be resistance, and how can we talk with you initially to try to get you maybe more on board with this. But to Alan's point, like, sometimes people just aren't going to be. And at the end of the day, hopefully, you know, the right thing wins out. But I think that knowing who your allies are is helpful. And you know, funding priorities can help with this too. Like it is not coincidental that the first sites that opened on the Walter Reed campus and the redevelopment are the affordable housing sites, right? Like they did that because we know that there's such a great need for affordable housing, and it's kind of situating that population there first, right, before anybody else. I actually don't know if that was intentional in that development or not, but it I think was a good call.
Yeah.
Brittany, I saw you unmute. Do you have a story?
Yes, I do. Especially for one of our sites, we do experience some complaints from a neighboring building of ours, and it has been quite challenging to try to like mitigate the issues. And we've been trying to meet that by doing some gentle, community education about the type of housing that it is, and being sensitive to like the need, but also balancing the needs of our program and our residents as well. Again, sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. When we find that things aren't too productive in that area, we also like to seek guidance from like our ANC, the local ANC, getting them involved and helping us kind of mitigate and build partnership and collaboration and kind of heal that relationship there. But it's something very real that we do deal with the resistance. But then we've also had experience with neighbors who are welcoming and they're open. So. Yeah.
All right, I'm looking to see a question here. Should DC be securing more vacant hotel space in lieu of, I think that's shelters, as many other cities have done at least during the pandemic? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, beyond shelter, there's a movement elsewhere in the country to make these motels permanent homes for people. It's happening in California and elsewhere. It's an interesting time, an interesting development that the pandemic has brought around. So we're going to see what that produces.
I was on a meeting earlier today, and there is a lot of conversation about that for DC, buying hotels and turn them into permanent housing.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly as businesses are receiving funds to tide them over during the economic downturn, that could be a trade-off that, you know, for hotels, making space available for the who are in need is, you know, as long as they're getting the city funds, let's put that to use.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have. I didn't know if anybody had any other closing statements, but if not, I think I think you guys did a wonderful job. I just really appreciated Alan, your heartfelt talk at the beginning was just really opened us up to where we can really help people. And I appreciate all the work that all of you do in your organizations to provide real solutions for people who are experiencing housing instability. I really do appreciate it. So thank you so much. I think we might be done. We have our leader, Nick, is going to come on and talk a little bit about the other programs sessions that are going on. So Nick, I'll cede the floor to you.
Well, Joanne, thanks very much indeed. And first, let me thank you and the panel. I mean, for a very insightful discussion this evening. I mean, certainly I've learned a lot from this. My name is Nick Manning. I've been coordinating the DuPont Circle Citizens Association Homelessness Committee for the last few months. And this has been the fourth in the 6-session series. And the basis of the series is that we don't know the best way forward, but we do know that what's happening right now in DC is either not optimal or not enough, and likely both. And, you know, tonight you've all underscored that it's not all about money, but limited resources are a binding constraint. And sure, homelessness is a multidimensional issue. And, you know, you've been reminding us that a home by itself is not enough, but it's never not about the lack of a home. Right. Our idea in putting this series together was just to help neighbors so that we're all in a slightly better position to make our own decisions about what it is we should do. Should we campaign? Should we lobby? What's the thing that we should do when we see this evident tragedy that's unfolding on the streets around us? The one just sort of personal observation, when the Homelessness Committee for DCCA, when it started up, then Kate Coventry, who you heard about earlier on, who is she knows everything there is to know about the costs of homelessness. She is Ms. Fiscal Analysis, and she pointed me towards some research on this, and I battled my way through just trying to understand, like, you know, what are the issues here, and, like, you know, why does a city like DC not do more? And it is perplexing. I mean, let me just quote from this is now a few years old, but a study that was undertaken looking at the costs of essential services for chronically homeless individuals who were left on the streets, right? And so this is an average across a fairly large sample. So a typical person in that category, and this is now, what, 5-6 years ago. So, you know, we should sort of add to these costs for inflation. But that typical person has cost over $1,000 in Medicaid costs for mental health visits. There's $1,000 for police interactions. There's $2,000 for ambulance services. There's over $6,000 for visits to the emergency room, and nearly $20,000 in costs to Medicaid, right? Well, I mean, if you add all that up, right, you know, and the fact is that the city is accidentally paying for all that piece by piece, but just because of the budget structure, it doesn't appear in one line. You don't see the shocking fact that this is what it is, that you know, the public purse is paying in order to maintain this evident tragedy that we're seeing on the streets. So I think that, you know, you guys have really helped to sort of, you know, put a sort of practical dimension to this. There is an alternative. And it's not so much new money as using the money differently. Yes. So I mean, I think you guys, between you, you've made that point so well. So thanks very much indeed for that. Just a very quick run through of where we're at in these events. So this is the 4th session, as I mentioned. In the first session, we looked at the additional difficulties, the further trauma that COVID-19 has added to the lives of people experiencing homelessness. The second looked at some of the roots of homelessness and the brutal arithmetic of the need for affordable housing and its limited availability. And tonight, again, you emphasize this point about this term affordable housing. Goodness, that covers a multitude of sins, doesn't it? You can make it seem as if there's a lot going on by sprinkling the word affordable around, but really, right, you know, it's not actually affordable for many people who are confronting the possibility of homelessness. The previous session, the last session, talked about psychological challenges and substance abuse, and we heard the important point that cause and effect is a conundrum. There's a higher incidence of such needs amongst people experiencing homelessness, but don't just rest easy about, oh, they're the people that tend to be homeless. The fact is also that homelessness itself has severe psychological consequences. There's a vicious circle at work here. And tonight we've heard about the importance of permanent supportive housing. And so homes that are more than just bricks and mortar, homes that offer real support. We've got 2 more sessions. On March the 18th, we're going to look at policy in DC and what recent approaches by the city have been successful, and what might we see in terms of potential steps to increase the availability of genuinely affordable housing. And we need some help on this, because when politicians throw numbers around, it's so easy to get confused. We've spent X millions on this or another Y million on that. How do we evaluate those numbers? We just get bewildered, right? So how should we think about what the city's actually doing in fiscal terms? And then on March the 25th, we're going to hear the experiences of LGBTQ youth and of women who've experienced homelessness, looking at the very specific challenges that they face. So I want to emphasize that our purpose in this series from the Citizens Association is to help all of us reach an informed view about where we can and should go from here. So thanks very much to all of you, and hopefully we'll see you all next week on the 18th. Thanks a million.
So much. Thank you so much. Appreciate all your time. Good night.